juventud frente al COVID-19. Mi nombre es Valeri Lorena, soy directora ejecutiva del Young America's Business Trust, YABT por sus siglas en inglés. Somos una organización internacional sin fines de lucro que trabaja en cooperación con la Organización de los Estados Americanos en promover el desarrollo económico y social de los jóvenes en las Américas y alrededor del mundo. Tengo el honor de ser facilitadora de este diálogo entre el secretario general Luis Almadro
and thousands of youths who are being represented by you, a young group of spokesmen who are with us here today. The activity that unites us today is a point of inflection in the process of juvenile participation that the OAS through the YABT develops throughout the region and the continent. It's a space to present the results of a complete process of youth consultations around priority topics that young people have brought up to us in the last few months. And on the other, in this activity, we will begin the process towards the 6th Forum of Youth of the America, Youth Participation, which supports Summits of the Americas since 2005. So it is a pleasure to work in partnership with the OAS and the Summit Secretariat in these efforts. The forum is an effective tool to search for concerted solutions, but above all, long-lasting to build and guarantee access to the development programs in the region, allowing the contributions of youth reach the highest agencies and processes of the OAS. The contributions of the young people are accompanied by the idiosyncrasies that characterize the youth: innovation, creativity, enthusiasm, and the energy of co-creating. In the last 13 years, the Youth Dialogue of the Americas has been developed within the framework of the General Assembly of the OAS, while the forum takes place as an event of the Summits of the Americas. The current edition of the Hemispheric Dialogue is taking place in this virtual format in response to the pandemic situation the world is living as a result of COVID-19. Throughout the event, we will deal with topics that the young people have brought up in the last 4 months, contributing to the topic of the General Assembly of the OAS, as well as the context of the global public health emergency generated by COVID-19. Around 2,300 youths were directly involved in the process. And to that end, I'd like to cordially welcome the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almadro, a person who's won the respect and admiration of thousands of youths in the region for his commitment, willingness, and honest interest in hearing each and every one of the voices of the social actors of the hemisphere. Secretary is at the table of this dialogue with the young people since he was elected in 2015 to be Secretary General of the OAS, and he's never missed this space. With no further ado, Mr. Secretary, we want to give you the floor. Thank you, Valeri. And it's a pleasure to be with you again, to have this opportunity to continue to work and strengthen this dialogue dynamic, which is so important for the Organization of American States. And I want to thank you, particularly this opportunity to have this exchange with the youth. First, because it's a new dimension. It gives the organization a new dimension to our professional abilities, and it makes us even bigger as persons, making us better professionals, better persons, with sincere contributions, with sincere words, and with a true rapprochement, which is so constructive, seeking to strengthen each and every one of our work conditions. The youth's participation in the decision-making processes has allowed the OAS to promote democratic values and the inclusive development agenda. The dialogue is an effective involvement tool with participation for youth. The more representations and constructive and open the dialogues, the better the results in the short and medium term. The youth have given the participation process a new dynamic, not only because of the use of technology, but because of their ability to organize and have an influence in the decision-making process in public policies to reduce inequalities and ensure a better distribution of wealth. Furthermore, there's special concern in the environment and the fight against corruption, and in obviously those questions related to transparency in the public management. Human rights have also been a priority for the youth. We're going through difficult times. The COVID-19 pandemic has drastically changed basic aspects of our daily routines, without mentioning the economic and social crisis, which is increasing day in and day out. Despite this, I want to highlight the attitude of the youth who did not stop. They adapted to this new context. They took the dialogue to the virtual level, maintaining the same level of commitment, and of course contributing with their volunteer work to find real solutions. They improved the processes, added content, took advantage of technology to develop regional dialogues, enhancing the role of youth and showing the best of the spirit of multilateralism. In hearing all the work that has been done for months to continue with the hemispheric dialogue, I see that we're on the right road as an organization and as a society. We've had 41 dialogues, and to that we add the virtual open consultation at all times. I want to say to the organizers, partners, and participants of these dialogues that I congratulate you. It's a motivation for you to repeat this experience, because this way we'll reach more young people, and we won't start at continuing the promotion of democracy, peace, integral development, and human rights at all levels for all of us who live in this hemisphere. You are the leaders of today and tomorrow. You convey trust, and we will have a better future based on what you're doing today. The Medellin Declaration, adopted at the 38th General Assembly of the OAS, points to the fact that the participation of youth in decisions related to their own development is a right and a responsibility, which turns them into indispensable actors in the formulation, execution, and evaluation of public policies. 12 years after, we see that the role of the young people is more and more proactive, strengthening the concept of democracy, participating in multilateral spaces like today, because their concerns are no longer just for their own country, but for the world. That's what we know as global citizenship. We're having more and more youth getting involved in popular election posts, public management, foreign service, businesses, social organizations, and networks or professional associations. Regardless of what the case is, there's one thing that characterizes all these groups of young people, and it's their motivation and conviction to find real changes in light of the dissatisfactions they observe around them. We have a continent that is carrying structural problems that are 200 years old in some cases, and in others decades. These structural problems have remained unsolved for years. I wouldn't want to have generation after generation to continue the same road where the problems are repeated over and over, showing the symptoms of poverty and inequality, which affect all of us, the imperfections of our democracies, which have affected all of us. That's why I want to congratulate the Young American Business Trust for their work, for continuing to reinforce an open space for youth in the OAS process. In fact, this was one of the motivations that gave rise to the creation of the YABT 21 years ago. And today, more than ever, they play that key and necessary role within the Organization of American States. I wish you all the best in this dialogue of young people, and in the rest of the activities that will be taking place as part of the week of the finals of the 15th edition of the America's TIC. Thank you very much, and it's a wonderful pleasure to be with you here today. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your words. And we now get into the contribution of the youth. And if you'll agree, we would like to invite our colleague Cecilia Vilchis, moderator of the Youth Contribution and coordinator of the forum, to take over chairing the presentations of the youth spokesman. So with all due respect, I'd like to ask the spokesman to turn their camera. They should turn their microphone only when they're given the floor, just their cameras. Cecilia, you have the floor, and thank you very much again. Thank you, Valeri, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. We are grateful for your cordial welcome. And I'd like to welcome the spokesman, the youth delegates, and all those who are with us here live. Today's dynamic will be 2 rounds of conversations with 5 and 4 spokesmen, respectively, who will present the contributions resulting from the youth consultation process that started last November 2019 to March 2020. The methodology we'll follow will be a 4-minute presentation by each one of the spokesmen, who will have a chance to talk about all the contributions obtained and represent the youths of the America who are involved actively in the process. After each round, the Secretary General will comment on each one of the participations. And the first round focuses particularly on the youth's perspectives vis-a-vis COVID-19, a round which is an opportunity for the spokesman to talk about the priority contributions for the youth of the Americas focused on the current challenges of the pandemic, calling on governments not to forget the effect of youth in the post-COVID construction plans of the region. And that's why I'd like to introduce the spokesman who will be in charge of the first round in the following order. The first spokesman, Ariana Alejandra Kaido Campos, in charge of Economic Recovery and Entrepreneurship, followed by Raquel Alexandra Montalban Carranza, who will talk about health systems and true information access, continuing with Abel Aronategui, who will talk to us about the vulnerable groups and gender equality. And the final one in the first round will be with Representative Joshua Fuerte, who's going to talk about climate change in the Caribbean. Prior to giving the floor to our first speaker this morning, I'd like to talk briefly about the details of the consultation process, which included, as was mentioned, more than 2,500 youths in a total of 22 countries in the Americas who had a chance to give their opinions, talk about their realities, and the actions they're taking right now on topics that are a priority not only for their communities, but for the current context as the effect of COVID-19, resulting in a direct contribution to the Inter-American Development Agenda at the highest possible levels. As we've said before, these were youth dialogues led by the youths themselves, initially organized in a face-to-face modality, and starting in March, it turned into the virtual modality as a result of the current problem of COVID-19. These contributions gave a total of 41 youth dialogues, 11 face-to-face, 30 virtual, and more than 250 contributions in the virtual consultation. Having said this, I'll start with the first round, and I'd like to introduce Ariana Kaido, who is a young Venezuelan member of the Valera Juvenile Network, will talk to us about economic recovery and entrepreneurship. Prior to her presentation, I'd like to mention the fact that throughout the consultation process, there were about 10 dialogues that spoke of this topic with more than 470 kids involved. Thank you. Ariana, you have the floor. Ariana, turn your microphone on. Ariana, you have the floor. You can start your presentation. Just turn your microphone on, Ariana. If you can hear us, turn your microphone on. Well, I think we're having a bit of a problem with Ariana's connection, so we'll call on the next speaker while she comes back. And I'd like to give the floor to Raquel Montalban Carranza. She's a Venezuelan who will talk to us about health systems and access to real information. She's a member of policy and development, and there were 4 dialogues with 140 youths involved. Raquel. Thank you, Cecilia, and thanks to the YBT team, and good morning to all of you. My special greetings to His Excellency, the Secretary General of the OAS, Mr. Luis Almagro. On behalf of the youth of the America, I'm Raquel Alejandra Montalban Carranza from Peru. I belong to the School of Law of the Peruvian University, UTC, and a vice president of the Juventud Política y Desarrollo Youth Group. As an organization, we seek to empower youths. As a spokesman, I'm bringing the contribution of the young people of the Americas on health systems and access to real information. Health is not only something physical, it's also mental. That's why we ask the governments to adopt a health policy through open and collaborative platforms to help in problems of anxiety, uncertainty, and family living together. Aside from the development of communications strategies that include all dealing with mental health for indigenous populations, avoiding stigmatization, and contribute with brigades of university students that can inform the population about these topics. To achieve these objectives, we insist on first doubling all efforts to safekeep the life of physicians, nurses, and the clinic and hospital staff or health centers who are the first line of defense vis-a-vis the pandemic. To ensure transparency in the public acquisition and purchase processes, and to protect access to medicines and medical devices. We also ask that the budgetary resources for public health be increased, including equipment and the necessary input to prepare the hospital environments. Information which goes hand in hand with a debate which came up during the dialogues, focusing on the collective hysteria with a large degree of lack of control due to misinformation and fake news that have led to so much uncertainty in society. And in this respect, we would like to propose, first, that they create and coordinate information platforms as well as simple methodologies to fight against misinformation. Second, that we play a determining role since we have greater control and understand the digital technologies even better. So we suggest that we have meetings with journalistic information experts with the youth to fight against misinformation and include society as well as economies. Furthermore, that we convey clear and true information to the most remote areas, trying to convey the appropriate messages in keeping with the needs of the region, with communication tools and reliable broadcasting for the children, the youths, and adults. And finally, from the level of youth organizations, we agree to contribute with all cooperation efforts between member states and other partners to promote equity in health, fight against disease, improve quality, and extend life of the people of the Americas. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Raquel, for your presentation. Remember to turn off your microphones and cameras while you're not speaking. We're going to give the floor to Abel Aronategui, Afro-Descendant, who will talk to us about vulnerable groups and gender equality. Abel, you have 4 minutes, but prior to that, I want to tell you that he spoke with about 6 dialogues during the consultation process and about 260 young people. Good morning to all. I want to thank the Organization of American States and the YABT for calling this Forum of the Americas for a participation process of the youth of the region. Today, more than ever, we've been invited to participate in the changes we need in this time of COVID-19 so that we can find better and more participative and inclusive societies. I also want to thank my ancestors, whom from the times of slavery to date have resisted and fought to open new roads for the youth, Afro-Descendant youth, so that we can be in these spaces and continue to fight for our human rights. I briefly introduce myself. I'm Abel Aronategui. I'm an Afro-Descendant from Panama. I'm a member of the Contrapeso Foundation, which uses movie and creativity to promote leadership of Afro-Descendants. I'm also a member of the Union of Afro-Descendant Youth of Latin America and the Caribbean and the National Coordination of Black Organizations of Panama. It's true that COVID-19 doesn't differentiate between nationalities, ethnics, gender, disabilities, or other aspects. However, it's also true that COVID-19 is affecting all equally. And for that reason, that population that has been historically excluded, are the ones that are most affected within the framework of this pandemic. And this is the reason why the youth of the Americas, regarding vulnerable groups and gender equality, would like to propose the following considerations. First, that the social, health, and economic effects of COVID-19 affect the youth more, the Afro-descendant youth and indigenous groups, groups with disabilities, women, LGBTI+, situations of mobility, and in jail. That racism, corruption, inequality, and the associated costs have been made worse within the framework of the COVID-19 pandemic, increasing poverty and extreme poverty in the most vulnerable groups, particularly amongst the young people. 3, that the responses of institutions of member states of the OAS within the framework of the current pandemic have been insufficient to respond to the needs of the youth due to the absence of data in the administrative records that include the variables of gender, ethnic, racial, and disability aspects. 4, that gender-based violence and harmful practices have increased, affecting our girls, teenagers, and youths. And in this context, the youths of the America propose the following. First, to strengthen the administrative records of health systems to increase the response capacity of the states of the Americas within the framework of this pandemic to benefit the Afro-descendant, indigenous groups, the women, LGBT+, and people with disability, and people in jails. 2, to promote participation of young women in politics, in decision-making processes, academia, international organizations, and the private sector, and promote their participation in training spaces to empower them in society. 3, to consult and include youth from an intercultural and intersectional approach in the response to the pandemic plans and its effects to ensure labor, development, and access to education of the youths of the Americas. 4, to recognize the rights of LGBTI+ and their contribution to the development of society. 5, to invest in programs and projects that reduce racism, corruption, and inequality and its associated costs that may affect vulnerable populations and multidimensional poverty. We, all of us, the youth of the America, agree to follow up, to comply with these agreements and continue to work as the largest generation of the history of the Americas to arrive at a society where we ensure the human rights of all persons, not leaving anyone behind. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your words, Abel. And now I'd like to invite Carlos Eduardo Lopez Sandoval, who is a member of the Pioneer Youth of El Salvador, who will talk to us about the role of youth and education, a topic which took place in 7 dialogues with more than 300 youths involved. Carlos, you have the floor. Thank you, Cecilia, and good morning to all of you, Secretary General of the OAS, representatives of the Summit, representatives of Young American Business Trust, and young leaders of the member states of the OAS who are with us here today. As mentioned, my name is Carlos Lopez Sandoval. I'm 26 years old, and I'm from El Salvador. My interests are commercial projects as well as social impact projects with youth empowerment approach, entrepreneurship and education, including an initiative of my own that I lead, which is called Young Pioneers. I thank you for this space. It's really an honor for me to represent the voice of hundreds of youths who express their ideas, perspectives, and solutions on the role that we should play vis-a-vis the challenge of education. Without a doubt, the health crisis as a result of COVID-19 opened up and showed us a weak educational system that requires a lot of improvement, inequalities in access to technology, and the existing exclusion due to discrimination and stereotyping. In Latin America and the Caribbean, before the pandemic, close to 12 million children and youths had been excluded from education. Unfortunately, the pandemic made this even worse. Official statistics of UNICEF feel that close to 91% of the student body globally has been impacted by the temporary closure of the educational system. And despite the fact that the governments and institutions have developed action plans to deal with the situation, the impact on the more vulnerable groups is enormous. Through this consultation process related to this topic, we identified 5 proposals to deal with the challenges of COVID in the field of education. First, suggest that we have greater initiatives of volunteers with the support of public and private institutions through which the young people may use their skills and knowledge to the service of others, with special emphasis on vulnerable people. The second proposal is to strengthen teaching training regionally, involving crisis management components, allowing them to face any emergency in a better informed and proactive way, as well as a reinforcement in soft skills that would allow them to offer comprehensive education to their students. The third proposal speaks of the establishment of public policies to reduce the existing digital gap, guaranteeing the right to education. We suggest that we channel international cooperation through the education ministries to support the student bodies with the limited resources who need access to devices or tools that would allow them to continue to learn. The next proposal considers the need to redesign the curriculum mesh to add knowledge and cross-cutting knowledge and skills, helping the students adapt to situations of change and resolve the problems that will occur after COVID-19. And finally, at a political level, leaders and decision makers must reflect on the establishment of a new social contract and a much more solidary, collaborative, and digital development model. We're in the presence of an unprecedented world situation. As a region, we have the opportunity to create a better and more inclusive reality. As youth, we are interested in participating to build on the future hand in hand with the different actors of society. The current health crisis accentuated the discontent and inequalities that we were living. As youth, we call on all of us to take action and begin to build now a new social reconstruction road beyond education to guarantee the welfare of all. Once again, thank you very much for the space and for allowing me to present my proposals on behalf of the youths that, like me, believe in a future where no one stays behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Carlos. I would now like to go back to Ariana Kaido, who's Venezuelan. and also mention to you that she will be talking about economic recovery and entrepreneurship, with 10 dialogues that were focused on this and more than 470 young people. Please go ahead, Ariana. Thank you very much, Cecilia. First, good morning, Secretary General and authorities of the OAS and the Young America's Business Trust and young leaders. As Cecilia said, I'm Ariana Kaido. I'm 21 years old. I'm Venezuelan, and I studied liberal studies and international studies, and I work as the executive director of economy and development for the Global Alliance for Young Politicians in Venezuela, and I am ambassador for the Valera Foundation. I am honored to speak on behalf of young people in my country and also the 2,500 young people in the region who, despite difficult conditions, took part in this consultation, going beyond simple recognition of problems to establish priorities and propose solutions. We know that overcoming COVID-19 is going to be an effort that will require many years. Our situation requires new and broader vision, especially in terms of economic recovery. In this regard, in the world, we hear about the fourth industrial revolution and opportunities for young people in situations like the one we're experiencing now. Meanwhile, Latin America, approximately 32% of the population lacks access to internet, according to CAF studies, and migrants and persons in a situation of human mobility are the most vulnerable. In terms of the situation, the young people who took part in the youth dialogues in the region proposed the following: create a platform so that business people can present their products both nationally and internationally, and we are asking for the authorities in all of Latin America to include high-level technology and also reinforce the skills of migrants. Also, young people want the strengthening of social protection mechanisms, especially for persons in that situation. Thirdly, promote knowledge and the study of new economies, green, orange, collaborative at all levels of education, as the objective to prepare young entrepreneurs for the future to face the challenges that will come in the post-pandemic era. Prioritize dialogue spaces on matters having to do with the future post-pandemic. Strengthen digital entrepreneurship as a bridge to reactivating the economy. And then urge the authorities and official members of the Organization of American States to sign an agreement to facilitate the implementation and regulation of telework in the context of this crisis. Young people in the region know more than ever that governments and intergovernmental organizations, businesses and individuals have to unite efforts to improve infrastructure and provide greater economic opportunities. We also urge the promotion of initiatives that hasten development, entrepreneurship, and innovation. There are tools that are available for effective economic recovery. What's most important, and I can say this on behalf of all of those who were involved in the process and have been since November, that we are willing to create new opportunities to build a new future. However, those who are currently making decisions in our country have to be convinced. So we hope that this is just the beginning of a path of collaboration and mutual growth. Mr. Secretary, the conditions are going to be very challenging. Fortunately, the young people of the Americas are strong enough to tackle these and transform this crisis into a growth opportunity for our societies. Thank you for your time. And thank you very much, Ariana. I would now like to continue and give the floor to Joshua Forte. He's a member of the Initiative on Climate Change from Red Diamond of Barbados. He is the representative of the Caribbean, and he will be talking to us about climate change in the Caribbean. Please go ahead, Joshua. You have the floor.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. I'm thankful for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the Caribbean. Thank you to the Secretary General of the OAS and the team of the Young America's Business Trust. As mentioned, my name is Joshua Forte of Barbados. the founder of Red Diamond Compost, a biotech social enterprise that focuses on creating biologic soil treatment and crop solutions as a solution against climate change. And today I'll be discussing some of the effects of climate change on the Caribbean. So from my background, growing up here in Barbados, between two communities, one a coastal community with a fish market at its epicenter, and also the garden, a community that's more inland and focused more on agriculture. I've been surrounded by the natural environment my entire life, and I've come to know the various ebbs and flows from the cycles of the fish to the the birds of the air, sorry. And the truth of the matter is that climate change is the single most existential threat to our existence. We've been through some of the longest droughts in our country's ever experienced, limiting access to fresh water in an already water-scarce region. Farmers are fighting to sustain themselves and our people as well. We've witnessed thousands of tons of sargassum seaweed bombard our shores and literally choke the life out of it, reducing our fish populations to alarming levels and damaging fishing vessels as well. We've witnessed rainfall in one evening severely flood communities in our region that to the extent we've never seen before. Our people from islands such as Dominica, St. Kitts, Barbuda, Bahamas have been assaulted by hurricane after hurricane after hurricane, worsened by rising sea levels and temperatures. This catastrophic loss of lives and livelihood has been one too many. The responsibility of these effects are not solely our own, because they've been caused by ripple effects from actions taken by others in neighboring regions and even on the other side of the world, leaving many of us fighting a battle in the Caribbean, where many times we're sleeplessly on edge when we see yet another major forest fire, or get reports of continuous overfishing in the North Atlantic, or new reports of agrochemical pollution in the oceans, or similar that of plastics and other types of waste materials. We then have to prepare ourselves for these challenges, the challenges that we are already facing on the ground, plus those that come from the continuous ripple effects of the actions of others. While many of us across the globe are still dealing with the impact of COVID-19 in the Caribbean, we have added to our plate the start of our hurricane season, which experts have warned and we are already witnessing will be one of the most active seasons thus far. In addition to that, we have the risk of mosquito-borne illnesses that we experience during this time as well, which include dengue, chikungunya, and Zika, and we're hoping nothing else is added to that list. With these challenges compounding on each other, we have not been silent, nor have we been idle, but we continue to be resilient and innovative. Myself, like many of my other colleagues across the region, from Haiti and Bahamas to Guyana and Suriname, those of us facing these challenges daily as inventors, innovators, and entrepreneurs, have developed sustainable and viable solutions to many of the climate disruptions that we face. Solutions that are even applicable beyond our shores. Collectively, what we need to see is more of a direct approach to financing and funding not only our governments, but specifically the social entrepreneurs and enterprises that have greater ability to aggressively attack and resolve these challenges while working with the public sector and civil society as well. Many times what we see is those few moments when support enters the region, sometimes it does not make it all the way to those communities and those people who are actively fighting for change. It goes without saying that the onslaught of this climate crisis has caused to our economies, has continued to take a toll on us. This is not a crisis that we created ourselves, and we feel like we should not be left to face it alone. Our future should not be denied, where our collective actions can make a difference. The community of the Caribbean wants all our partners across the region and across the world to remember that in facing this climate crisis, we will only make it through this together. Together, everyone achieves more. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Joshua. And with that, we close out our first round. I would like to give the floor back to the Secretary General of the OAS, Luis Almadro. You have the floor to share your comments on the first round of interventions. Thank you very much, Cecilia. Thank you to all of you for all of your comments, for all of the proposals and recommendations. I'm very pleased to hear the results of these different summits that have been able to systematize these dialogues and to put it in writing so that we can do better follow-up. I share support for all of the points put forth, whether it's about structural problems or solutions looking forward. Clearly, it's very difficult to sum up in 5 minutes what was said in 20 minutes by all of you, and those were 20 minutes that were full of content and very substantive ideas. First, we can see the initiatives on strengthening healthcare systems and creating greater transparency in health systems. That is something extremely positive. This is a structural duty in the Americas and worldwide. Clearly, this is something you've conceptualized as the problem. The healthcare system have always been and continue to be the heart of public corruption worldwide. Much is lost to corruption in the health sector on an annual basis. We have to have a healthcare system with more accurate and truthful information, matters of transparency, better governance, mechanisms to fight corruption. That is something that is key. We also support initiatives concerning having clearer and more powerful, stronger opportunities to provide mental health support and services. Mental health is something that has not been approached in a comprehensive way, especially considering the magnitude of the problem. We are quite far away from the real solutions necessary. We're quite far away from identifying all of the problems involved. So moving forward in that sense is an imperative. Because we have to have human resources, financial resources devoted to this. That is key. Protection for healthcare personnel, doctors, nurses. They have been stigmatized during COVID. They have been attacked. And in many cases, they've been made to feel responsible for the spread of COVID-19. That is obviously something that needs to be done away with. We have to strengthen them as a profession and strengthen respect for them. As to young people in education, the matter of fake news has to be addressed in a context of law enforcement, where we have to strengthen that type of work, it's essential. And the conditions of the spread of fake news can truly undermine social conditions, different social practices. They undermine mechanisms to fight the pandemic and economic and social conditions that they themselves generate. Strengthen vulnerable populations. Clearly, this is essential. And we truly value the comments you made. A great deal of leadership is necessary. We need affirmative action. These populations that have been stigmatized, it hasn't been by accident. This has been a systemic and human approach to their stigmatization. If certain populations have suffered discrimination for hundreds of years, we've talked about structural issues of discrimination. We have to shift paradigms in the fight against discrimination. There has to be much more leadership, much more affirmative actions, public policies to affirm such concepts. The vulnerability of LGBTQ plus populations, the vulnerabilities of Afro-Descendants, women, the vulnerabilities of migrants and other population groups. All of this has been exposed during the pandemic. It has revealed this in our society. We've seen, uncovered the discrimination that these groups have suffered for hundreds of years. There have to be policies and other social approaches to doing what is right, to doing what is necessary to eliminate all forms of discrimination. I value the proposals made, and of course, this and much more is necessary if we are going to move forward. This is unfinished business in our hemisphere. We condemn the murder of George Floyd in the United States or in any other country. This is a moral imperative for us. I always refer to the situation in my country where the Afro-Descendant population face structural elements that we have to shed light on, and we have to ensure that we're reaching a different level of commitment through public policy as we shift the social dynamic and political dynamic in the country. We have to fight racism. We have to ensure that there are better conditions for integration. Young people in education. We have huge deficits in terms of education. Our education systems do not include everyone, all of our citizens, but of course there are huge differences in quality. Education is an ongoing investment. The results are not immediate, and often there's no political return on investment in the immediate term. Therefore, it is necessary to have government policies, social policies that are more integrated so that we can eliminate these variables that perpetuate discrimination, especially when there's a lack of equality and distribution in terms of education. And closing the gap, as you were saying, Carlos, would be a proactive affirmative action, a real one. The quality of integration, it's not going to happen organically. And of course, it's not going to spread to the more marginalized parts of society and the economy. And because that was done, for some reason, society has marginalized people economically and socially. And so to expect that the education system is going to change just on its own is crazy. It's never going to happen. Proactive measures need to be taken. We have to have a different education paradigm. It's got to be one that is integrated, because and that is not just going to happen without effort. It's not going to be automatic. This will never happen, because it wouldn't have happened in the past if it happens automatically. It's not going to happen with fancy consultants' reports. It will only happen when there is social action, targeted policies toward that objective, making sure that the policies are transferred to the people. If these solutions are not put in the hands of people, there is no way this is ever going to change. I completely agree with you. And I completely agree that we have to have a more cross-cutting approach to everything we are addressing in society. Not just the digital divide, the gaps in the labor market are also going to continue. As to conditions to reactivate the economy, obviously, given the current context, policies to reactivate the economy are going to need 3 different components. We're going to need new and additional financial resources, and they have to be targeted. In the world, we're all going to be more indebted, and we're going to see even greater indebtedness. That's necessary. And for this, we have to have more flexible conditions for returns on those investments and for repayment of any loans. And this will allow us to have better human resources. We have to train our human resources. We have to forge that path, so we are rebuilding different work skills. These new work skills and competencies requires capacity building and education, because without that, it's not going to be possible. It's very necessary for new policies to lead to new working conditions and new jobs that are necessary. Technology. If we cannot continue to create capacity, we are going to be stuck at the same point. I completely agree that this requires new programs, new projects. As to climate change, first, climate change, both in the multilateral system and very often at a national level, especially in the more developed countries, is something that keeps being pushed off, kicking the can down the road. They don't see it as something urgent. And this is very important. What is the essence of the main structural problems and factors that are hitting our countries. In this hemisphere, we cannot ignore the effects of climate change. Year after year, we are seeing more devastating hurricane seasons, natural disasters that are having a much greater impact on society, a much greater economic impact. They're hitting infrastructure much harder. We cannot ignore this. It is very important to put resources towards adaptation and mitigation. That mitigation actions must be implemented. And I welcome your proposals. This is a comprehensive package having to do with infrastructure, what Joshua was discussing. The necessary conditions for productivity that have to be sustainable. This, too, is a pending debt by those countries that are more developed and contaminate and pollute more. They must pay that price. Nothing is going to happen if we don't have a conversation about changing the way we do business, and this needs to be paid for by developed countries. They also have to pay for adaptation. That is absolutely key. Economic, social, productive, and infrastructure conditions. This has to be addressed, because if not, what we're expecting, and countries that are suffering the most from climate change if they are the ones who have to absorb the costs when they have not been the beneficiaries, is one of the most unfair paradigms that exists globally. So thank you very much for the initiatives, for the proposals. I think that we have a system in place now where we can do the best possible follow-up. Yes, thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Thank you very much for your comments and your words to these young people. This truly does prompt the dialogue. We wanted to thank you for your leadership, for creating an integral response to COVID-19, which economically speaking, as Ariana was saying, is having an impact on all of us. And just a few days ago, the head of the Western Hemisphere from the IMF, Andrew Boardman, presented figures that were very concerning. It's going to be a 9.4% economic contraction in 2020 in Latin America and the Caribbean. And said from social distancing, and this is just going to get worse. We're going to see contraction in economic activity, and the worst recession in recent history. And those who will be most affected are people who are already vulnerable and unemployed, and that's young people. As we heard from the spokespeople, their concerns are very aligned with those of the adults in terms of decision makers. So we are very thankful to you for listening and to value and respect this dialogue.
Intervenciones, como comentábamos al principio.
I'd like to begin the second round of presentations. As we said at the beginning, there was two approaches during the participation process. One, topics that the youth had been working with and that concerns them even before the pandemic. And in February, when we are hit by this global health crisis, there was an adjustment in the subject matter in response to COVID-19. And for this reason, we'd like to refer to the topic that they've been working with before or I should say pre-pandemic. And I'd like to invite my colleague Edgar Maestre, Director of the YABT programs for Latin America. And the first group of spokespeople get ready to release their mic. You can remain with us in the dialogue, but we're going to invite the next group of spokespeople. Edgar, we're giving you the floor, and I'd like to invite the young people to remember to press the blue button when they're asking for the floor. We'll continue now. Thank you, Valerie, and good morning, Secretary General Almadro, Mrs. Maria Celina Conte, the OAS team, and YABT, the spokespeople, and all those who are following us in this live digital signal. As mentioned, my name is Edgar Maestre. I'm Program Director for Latin America for the Young Americas Business Trust, and it's an honor to have this opportunity to act as facilitator of this second round of contributions related to young youth's priorities in action. And I'd like to introduce the spokespeople who will be in charge of the different presentations and their subject matter in the following order. Alejandra Maldonado Mena from Ecuador, who will be in charge of economic and social development and youth decent employment. Rocio Milagros Collantes from Panama, who will talk to us about the young people and the sustainable development objectives, the Decade for Action, followed by Alan Rosas Alvarado from Mexico, who will be talking to us about youth participation and citizen inclusion. And we'll end with David Martinez's presentation. He's from Peru, who will talk to us about the response and position of the young people of the Americas. We want to remind you that each one will speak for 4 minutes, and once concluded, the Secretary General will take the floor once again to share his impressions regarding the presentations of this second round, which is starting at 11:02 Washington time. I think it's interesting to remind you that those who are not speaking, please keep your microphones turned off so as not to interfere with the session, as Mrs. Valeri Lorena mentioned. With no further ado, and with the energy that we feel with this new group of young spokespeople, I'd like to give the floor to Alejandra Maldonado Mena from Ecuador, who will be talking to us about economic and social development, youth's decent employment, which was considered during 4 youth dialogues with 324 young participants. Alejandra, welcome, and thank you for being with us. You have the floor. Good morning, and thank you very much. I greet you. My name is Alejandro Maldonado from Quito, Ecuador. I am Assistant Coordinator of the Political Youths of the Americas and Director of the Initiative Dialogues, Ecuador. Honourable Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almadro, the authorities and special guests. The subject matter is economic and social development and decent employment. Recent figures show us that in Latin America and the Caribbean, there are 9.4 million unemployed youths. 23 million don't study or work, nor do they have any type of training. More than 30 million are only able to find informal employment. Employment within the reach of youths are scarce, with income way below those established by the labor laws, and with a very high level of instability, which means that there is no protection of their rights. We, young people, feel that in our Latin American countries and in the Americas in general, policies that lead to the creation of labor opportunities should be promoted. We want our governments to allow these policies to go beyond dogmas and not be organically delayed. In other words, that there's true compliance. We believe that there should be public policies and strategies that support the decent work for young people, focusing on ensuring access to education, entrepreneurship, and innovation. We urge the states as well as the private sector of the Americas that they develop strategies that can affect the youth. We hope that in our countries, public and private partnerships are promoted in our countries so that we're able to receive the support from entrepreneurial initiatives that give rise to new opportunities for young entrepreneurs and for those who have the necessary conditions to become future entrepreneurs or revitalizing agents of our economies, both locally as well as nationally. We propose that they include projects to train the public and private sector vis-a-vis the employability of youth belonging to vulnerable groups with special needs, making it possible for them to have access to tools, methodologies, and labor integration mechanisms, reducing those barriers that prevent them from having access to the labor markets. Latin American youths feel that a possible ideal for the benefit of the youth would be free access to public education and quality education at no cost. Considering this, the only way to arrive at decent life to contribute to the economic development of our countries, as we suggest that platforms be implemented to efficiently support the youth in vocational orientation for young graduates, avoiding student dropout. We urge the states to include constitutional amendments in the field of social development to benefit the young people in a state of defenselessness, extreme poverty, or social and economic inequalities. For we know that these disadvantages not only contribute to an individual weakness, they're also weakness for the states for their immediate future. We ask that programs be developed to promote economic inclusive models under the approach of collaborative economies to include different actors and sectors of the productive chain of goods and services. And we suggest that a project of high economic development be implemented in the rural communities who have no opportunities and who may be led by youth who could be in turn guided and trained to become fundamental community actors, thus identifying the real needs of the community and working for them. In this process, we not only call upon the states I've lost her. Unfortunately, I've lost her.
Yeah, and I say that.
Alejandra, I don't know if you can hear me. Can you take over?
Refresh.
Can you do a refresh, Alejandra? Alejandra, are you able to hear us? We have your video, but we're unable to hear you. Now? Yes, Alejandra, we can hear you now. Okay, we can hear you. Should I start again? No, you're fine. You can just pick up where you left off.
Si me escucha, puede continuar.
Alejandra, if you can hear me, can you continue with the reading where you left off? Well, while we go through another channel to connect with Alejandra, we'll go to the next speaker and have him make his presentation. Alejandra, if you can hear me, just keep your microphone off for now, and we'll continue with the next presentation from Rocio Milagros Collantes, who is from Panama, as I mentioned. Rocio, you have the floor. Welcome and thank you for your participation and your support in this process. Alejandra. Rocio, you have the floor. Good morning to you all. Can you hear me? Yes, we hear you. Not very well. Good morning, Your Excellency Luis Almadro, Secretary General of the Organization of American States. Your Excellency Luis Vigouria, Executive President of the Young American Business Trust, Honourable Mr. Edgar Maestre, Program Director for Latin America of the Young American Business Trust, Presidential Authorities of member countries of the Organization of American States, Youth Delegates of the Americas, dear participants who are seeing us through the social network. Today, I'm going to speak on youth and the Sustainable Development Objectives, Decade of Action. First, I'd like to express my most sincere gratitude to the Organization of American States and the Young American Business Trust for allowing me to share this space with you, the young people who are considered the future generations, and to express my point of view on the objectives of sustainable development, a resolution approved by the General Assembly of the Organization of United Nations on September 25th, 2015. According to the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, the 2030 Agenda establishes a transforming vision for economic, social, and environmental sustainability of the 193 member states subscribing it. The 2030 Agenda is a civilizing agenda which places decency and equality of all in the center. It's ambitious and visionary in requiring the participation of all actors of society and state for its implementation. It is a duty we have as a civil society. We must achieve the goals of the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda to implement peace and international security at a world level at all sectors. What we, the young people, really want is for the authorities to understand that they're not the only ones who are worried and wanting to improve the public policies and inequalities or education, health, environment, and sustainable development, and prevention of violence and corruption in states. The youth are also concerned and willing to support all projects that refer to this, based on the responsibility, commitment, international cooperation, and entrepreneurship and innovation for the welfare of mankind and future generations. I believe it's fundamental for youth to participate in this commitment, which we as countries have acquired to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Objectives and the 2030 Agenda, because these are our future. We should teach them not to repeat the mistakes of the past. We expect that in this decade of action, we continue to implement, and civil society will continue to do so to achieve the best results and not lose all the work that's being done to improve every single sector it represents. We'd like to take advantage of the partnerships, foundations, networks, and youth organizations who are willing to follow up on these projects that are mentioned in the Sustainable Development Objectives, for these are the representatives of youth worldwide. I want to ask you 3 questions. The authorities, the youth, and the public in general who's hearing me, who's seeing me through the social networks. Are we really aware of the fact that in each sector of the communities, the SDGs are being implemented? Do vulnerable communities understand the true meaning of the SDGs? Are we willing to achieve this goal of the decade of action of the SDGs? In fact, I think we should work to let those sectors understand that they can come to us, that we're willing to support them, to assist them in whatever they need. And that's what we expect. As young leaders of the Charter of the Earth, we want to urge the authorities, the young people, and the public in general to pay attention to the General Conference 40C80 on November 16, 2019, on the contribution of the Charter of the Earth to the activities of the Organization of United Nations for Education, Science, and Technology, better known as UNESCO, which relates to education for sustainable development. a document which will allow us to implement the relationship of SDGs and the principles of respect, care, ecological integrity, social justice, economic justice and democracy, nonviolence and peace of the Earth Charter that schools, universities, ministries, institutions, non-government and international organizations in the world implemented. Let us recall that the Charter of the Earth was created on June 29, 2000, recognized through the General Conference 32C on October 1, 2003 of UNESCO, with 16 principles that implements a global movement. This charter enunciates values and principles through which one can achieve sustainable development. It is the result of an intercultural world dialogue of a decade that works on common objectives and shared values, used as an educational instrument, as a reference, and as a tool for the development of policies, planning, and decisions, and many other things. Let us leave no one back. We have a right to live a decent and healthy life. Let us implement the ethics of these values so that there is peace in this world. The young people of this world agree to work and continue and give continuity and follow-up to the implementation projects of the Sustainable Development Objectives of the United States. You can count on us forever. My contribution is on behalf of the youths of the Americas. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rocio, Collantes, and we want to remind you to use the 4 minutes so as not to affect the agenda. And we apologize once again for the technical problems we've had with Alejandra Maldonado's connection. However, she only had 2 more sentences, and we agreed to send you the document so that you can read it completely. This is due to the time issue. It's already 11:17 Washington time, and I apologize once again and would now like to express our gratitude to Rocio once again for her presentation and invite Alan Rosas Alvarado from Mexico, who is president of the Revolutionary Young Expression, who will talk to us about youth participation and citizen inclusion, which was discussed in 4 dialogues with 256 youths. Alan, you have the floor. And be very strict with the time, please. Thank you and welcome. Thank you. Good day. It's a pleasure. First of all, I'd like to express a very special gratitude to Valeri and Ceci and Gloria Joel, Maria, Edgar, and all those who are making this possible. Your Excellency, Secretary, I'm Alan Alvarado, proudly Mexican from Coyoacán. I'm an attorney from the School of Law of UNAM, where I chaired in the students' body, and I formed the Mexican Federation. I'm a member of the Revolutionary Institutional Party of Young People in Mexico. And from Mexico, we coordinated the campaign, Almadro, you stay at the OAS. To be young represents a lot of challenges, some positive, some not so positive. But as Dario said, youth is a divine treasure. And it's an ideal moment to create what we're going to be in the future. That's why the youths of the continent agreed, as was mentioned by you, Mr. Secretary, that there was a need to center on education at all levels, the training of people with different skills, and focusing on things that can train future teachers to include these young people in their communities, since to separate them or segment them would not allow them to develop their skills when they're able to, which they're only able to do when they do it in teams. Another aspect was to visibilize or see the realities of the Afro-Descendant youths and their different perspectives, gender, disability, and sexual orientations. We understand that we young people are different. We're concerned with the environment. We believe it's important for the states to strengthen inclusion and eliminate every type of discrimination and formulate public policies with an ethnic and inclusive formula. As for political participation, the young people insist on the need to be involved in the creation of public policies to avoid generational shocks and to have an inclusive and modern approach when we design these instruments to ensure that care be given to all young people without distinction of social condition, gender, population, race, sexual orientation, physical condition, or particularly those from the rural areas that are in the most remote areas of our country. Young people want to learn to be better people, implementing ethics and values based on peace and international security. In Mexico, the dialogue promoted the establishment of a tie between the young leaders from different parties of the continent with union and cooperation amongst the youth arose, including Canada, the Liberal Party, the Democratic Party of the United States, and 22 parties from the center and south of the continent. We were organized thanks of technologies like WhatsApp and to harmonize some principles and criteria so that we could work together with a view to our international meeting, since we can set the example of work and union in our countries. The young people of the continent know that we must strengthen that political leadership of us as young people with the awareness of our political participation. And we've decided to build and institutionalize citizens' participation ways so that they include the young people as the main actors. This pandemic showed us clearly that we can be connected no matter where we're found, as long as we have access to the internet. That way we can create spaces for remote conferences allowing us to be together and in communication, like in the case of the youths of parties. I think that the state should agree to have public policies that achieve the SDGs, and that they consider the young people as the first line of action in government programs. That's why we consider that it's essential for youth organizations to include in their lines of work the formative axis and to find new ways of getting involved in the policy construction processes. Mr. Almadro, members of the YABT, on behalf of all youths in Mexico, and I'm sure of the continent, we express our gratitude for giving us this opportunity and this space to express ourselves, to express our concerns and the concerns that millions of us are concerned about. We want peace. We want a united American continent that respects the principles of freedom and democracy. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alan, for bringing up such important topics. We're just about to conclude with the last presentation, who will be by David Martinez, who's a young Peruvian national director of the YABT organization in Peru, who will talk to us about response and position of youth of the Americas. David, welcome. You have the floor. And we remind you, you only have 4 minutes. Good morning, Your Excellency, Luis Almagro, Secretary General of the Organization of American States, the team from YABT, and all the youth selected wherever you're located in the American continent, and all the participants who are with us through the social networks from your homes. Allow me to introduce myself, Mr. Secretary. My name is David Martinez, founder of Young YABT in Peru, an organization that goes for the leadership of youth to promote the implementation of the 2030 Agenda in our 7 cities. For me, it is an honor and an enormous satisfaction to be able to participate in this dialogue with you. And in this virtual format this time, I remind you that last year I had a chance to meet you and talk to you in Medellin, in Colombia, as part of the Youth Dialogue. And I feel highly satisfied to know that you and my colleagues and myself are still agreeing on a common issue: youth as a generation of incidents and the creation for participation spaces for action. I'm deeply grateful for this opportunity, and I have to tell you what the contribution of my spokespeople said. I'd like to comment on the presentations of my colleagues. COVID-19 is teaching us a holistic lesson, not only as lesson for the member governments, but for the youth. Temporary solutions are useless for structural problems. As we heard from Diana, we cannot allow us to continue to have deficiencies in connectivity and infrastructure. We believe that, according to the proposals of the youth of the Americas, the Organization of American States should be our main partner in the implementation of these initiatives. Secondly, I think it's important to comment that in the health sector, where beyond the deplorable situation of many establishments in many of the American countries, we see that there's a need for greater emphasis on mental health, where vulnerable communities are so exposed. And that's why we urge the member states, as I mentioned, as my colleague Matel said, that we democratize the information so that it is more transparent and more honest. And now I'd like to speak of the position of vulnerable groups and gender, where in the midst of the 21st century, we find that the LGBTIQ community still has machista patterns of behavior, preventing them from a free expression of their feelings. And we urge the member states to strengthen the human rights approach. Mankind is the only one capable of characterizing us. We are unhappy to hear what happened to George Floyd, but we're even unhappier to see the situation of so many young people who still don't find a safe place where they can express themselves freely. And now I'd like to go to the education. As mentioned before, these are critical, and I must speak of the 5 proposals mentioned by the youth of the America and presented by my friend Carlos. I think it's important to mention that the position of the young people is quite evident: climate change, which goes beyond all the existing agreements. It's a direct commitment. It has to be a direct commitment of all member states and included in their state plans cross-cuttingly from the very beginning. Now we talk about employment, full employment, but not just employment, but decent employment for youth who are unable to truly integrate into the labor markets. I also think it's important to mention what we talk about of the 2030 agenda, which is also important. As Rocio mentioned, we're going into the decade of action where we wonder about the commitment of all sectors. I think we have to strengthen partnerships to achieve the intergovernment and multilateral objectives. And finally, in youth participation and citizen inclusion, I believe that many vulnerable populations, like the Afro-Descendants, are still not visible enough, considering gender, disability, or sexual orientation. And that's why we urge the member states to strengthen inclusion and cohesion even more as an initial principle to achieve maximum integration and consideration of young people in the creation of public policies by strengthening the leadership and process of decision-making at a government level. I'd like to speak even further. I have so many ideas that I can express and proposals that I've heard from the youth of the Americas, but I thank you for this opportunity, and I hope that this will be part of your patterns of thought, which I'm sure you share with us. It's an honor to address you and to address all the young people in my presentation. Thank you very much.
Con esto damos por concluida la segunda ronda de intervenciones de voceras y voceros juveniles, y ahora invitamos a nuestra audiencia a escuchar los comentarios por parte del secretario general de la OEA, señor Luis Almadro.
The Secretary General of the OAS, Luis Almagro. Thank you to all of you for your contributions. They're so sensible, and they are the essence of what the future of economic development is going to be. Economic, social development, and youth employment, how this is structured, and the way you have to deal with this, and the way society has been developing, has been implementing this. It is very difficult for young people to prove their value, to do so in terms of what they can contribute to economic development and in the labor market. It is clear that, as Alejandra was saying and her group was saying, that we're lacking projects. It's very clear. We have to have other projects in place that bring employment levels to a new level, specifically targeting vulnerable populations that are able to make the most of the huge abilities of young people to create and to produce. This is not something that gets galvanized automatically by young people. This is something that cannot be dealt with just by public policy. Your entrepreneurship and every job for a young person contributes a great deal to our societies, not just financially, but what we generally see is that it is very difficult to access conditions that would make the most of the capacities that you as young people have. We have to do a lot of re-engineering in terms of levels of entrepreneurship. We have to support you differently. We have to support youth entrepreneurship differently. There have to be public policies to support youth entrepreneurship in a different way. There also have to be public policies to support youth employment in a different way. Open up new technological dimensions, taking advantage of the abilities and capacity that you specifically have. You continue to be considered consumers. Many studies have been done to look at your consumption patterns in an effort to know what it is that can be sold to you. However, studies have not been done about the capacity that you have to empower new types of employment and new types of entrepreneurial undertakings. This is unfinished business, and it's very important to highlight that here. What is more, young people are very vulnerable. All of you have indicated this. Rocio, Alan, David, Alejandra, you've been very clear on this. This has to do with gender, it has to do with race, sexual orientation, and sometimes just because you're young. And we've seen, unfortunately, some setbacks in the public sphere in this regard. Ethics and values are necessary. Old fossilized values that we still hold on to, in many cases are not democratic, and in many cases they do not allow for full access to everyone. These are values that are well expressed, but the way they're structured has allowed for discrimination and inequality to continue to regenerate. Poverty engenders poverty, inequality engenders inequality, discrimination engenders further discrimination. The truth is, working toward the SDGs, the community dimension is one of the crucial points, at least in our opinion. Often, policies at a macro level tend to repeat what the SDGs are. However, when we bring this down to the communities, you can see the vast difference there. It's important to bring these together because that's where we see discrimination begin, and yet that's where discrimination should come to an end. And doing this in the field, I referred to this briefly in my previous summaries. If we're able to bring this work to the ground and do it at the community level, that's where we're going to be able to change the situation that continues to generate and reproduce discrimination. Alejandra talked about the need to fully comply with and reach the SDGs. Alejandra, thank you for the, Alan, thank you for your efforts for my re-election, and please share my thanks with the entire group. You were far more convinced of my re-election than I was at the outset, and you even began your efforts before I did. So at the end of the day, I think thanks to you, I was convinced of becoming a candidate again, and this is something that we achieved together. We also heard talking about citizen participation and visibility. In politics, that is the essence of youth participation, or should be at the very least. Often, political systems do not open their doors just naturally. You have to implement actions to raise your profile so that those doors will be open to you. And political systems are the losers, especially when they don't allow youth leadership, when they don't allow for your initiatives to be pursued. And this ultimately impacts the capacities political systems have to offer solutions to many of the issues out there. Generation gaps continue to exist in politics. It is very difficult for young people to find spaces and opportunities that allow you to make your complaints, and complaints that will ultimately lead to change. I believe there's a lot to be done. This is a point where I would like to particularly look at youth dynamics and participation within the OAS. First, we have to raise the profile on these projects here in the organization and also open up spaces to you. I commend all of you. Your political participation has come through you seeking out different paths. You've done this assuming a great deal of responsibility and have pursued things that would have been left by the wayside in the past. Democratic institutions are not embracing you enough. I believe that institutions continue to lag behind in terms of the openness they should be to your complaints and the solutions that you are proposing. Institutions remain in the 20th century, and many lack the capacity to execute actions in a 21st century way, and that's work that needs to be done. We need to continue to open doors to you. I completely agree with what David was saying when he talked about the capacity for action that young people have and how COVID-19 has revealed to us the need to have young people fully integrated into holistic elections that we want to see happen. As young people, you are able to both call attention to and promote support for the most vulnerable in our society. You have a commitment to this, and you've taken on a leadership role. Thanks to that, I think that we can reach solutions that have not been possible in the past 200 years. You have accepted responsibility and taken on leadership, and I thank you for that. All other political dynamics continue to be the same and to continue to have the same result. What you're doing is pursuing these affirmative actions, proactive actions that can prompt a change in real power and changes in society with these dynamics. I wanted to thank you once again for your remarks. I value these events. We have to remain in contact. We can do this on a daily basis. We have to provide weekly responses to these initiatives. So I am extremely grateful to all of you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General Luis Almagro. We would once again like to express our sincere thanks to you for your time and your attention to listen to the remarks of each of our spokespersons, our young people from both rounds, and to provide comments to enrich this dialogue, because the young people are the present and the future of our region. To our spokespeople, thank you so much for your presentations. I have been very gratified to serve as moderator of this round. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor back to our Master of Ceremonies, Maria Selena, so that we can continue. Valeri, so that we can continue. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Our deepest thanks for your comments, for your feedback. We promise to provide you with copies of all of the presentations, and thank you for offering this. This has to be a back and forth. I think we're on a good path, and we can continue on to pursue and follow up on these initiatives, of course. I would now like to welcome Maria Selena Conte, who is the Interim Director of the Secretariat for the Summits of the Americas, our partners in YVT, and she will speak to our young people about the context and the importance of their participation in the summits process. Maria Selena, good morning. Thank you, Valeri. On behalf of the Secretariat for Summits of the Americas, I am very honored to join you on this important occasion. It's been very gratifying to hear these important proposals and reflections by these young people who have taken on so much responsibility vis-a-vis the future of our hemisphere, and to hear this dialogue they have with the Secretary General of the organization, who from the very beginning of his time at the OAS has been supporting the work of the YBT and the role of youth in the region. I also wanted to extend my greetings to the host, the Young American Business Trust. We have been working with you hand in hand for more than 15 years from the Secretariat for Summits, having very effective opportunities for dialogue with young people in the framework of the summits. I wanted to congratulate the young spokespeople here. Today, more than ever, I think it is key to involve all social actors when it comes to thinking about better ways especially in the current context of how to tackle and recover in these very difficult times that the region is experiencing because of COVID-19. It is hitting our region very hard. And as we heard just a few moments ago by Valeri, new figures that have been released by the IMF talks about a 9.4% contraction for this year. That is 4 percentage points higher than the predictions just 2 months ago. This has implications and will have a disproportionate impact, particularly on vulnerable groups in the region. The challenge is huge. We have to make sure that all actors and stakeholders are involved, particularly young people in the Americas. The truth is, one of the strengths of our region lies in its people, in its human capital. And in our case, we're the region with a young demographic that is very motivated. We should join efforts with all social actors, and the Secretariat of Summits has been doing something, particularly young people, so that we can come up with joint plans and make sure that young people's voices are reflected in the development of public policies. This also helps us to create social resilience vis-a-vis this reality. I am very proud to continue from the Secretariat for Summits to facilitate these spaces so that we can hear the voices of young people and bring them into debates and discussions. The input from social actors, civil society as a whole and in all of its diversity enriches the conversation. The Summits of the Americas, the participation of young people, and the role of entrepreneurs in developing solutions that help us to galvanize the economy, reduce inequalities is truly a priority. The topic of young people and work is an important component of the work of the Secretariat, Summit Secretariat. And for that reason, it's both an honor and a privilege to be joining you today and to have been able to hear your comments and your thoughts. We're very pleased to join with the Young America's Business Trust here and to talk about some plans toward the 6th Forum of Young People of the Americas. This is the platform for youth participation in the summits process. This has been part of each Summit of the Americas since the 4th summit that was held in Mar del Plata in 2005. I remember it very well because back then I was working in another part of the organization. I was a lot younger. And what we were trying to do was bring the voices from different sectors to the agenda of that Mar del Plata summit. And specifically, the topic of that summit was decent work, and that it was very important to have the voice of young people, especially given what we're experiencing today. We also celebrate the inclusion of programs for funding and support for innovative initiatives spearheaded by young people in the different forums and the summits. With this action, we have been able to see the ability to link objectives and priorities from many different sectors and creating partnerships amongst young people, governments, the private sector, civil society, and others who have shown that when we have a shared objective, we can all work together. From the time I began in my position as interim director of the Secretariat and in other areas of the OAS, I've been able to witness the efforts of the Young American Business Trust, the energy, creativity, and particularly the responsibility that all of you, the young people of the Americas, have shown in terms of development, progress, equality, and above all, inclusion. The role of entrepreneurship, tied with leadership and commitment in order to achieve a better future, reflected in the contributions that young people bring to the summits as part of a social group with initiative, conviction. And so I would like to commend you on the work that you've been doing over the years. Approximately 2,400 young people have made contributions to systematize this edition of the dialogue, and this shows clear interest by youth to be part of the initiatives and shows us very clearly how young people are seeking out this type of opportunity, and that's why it is so important for us to support these efforts. Congratulations once again to the great YBT family, and thank you so much for everything that you've done for our young people now and in the past. Thank you very much for your trust in the Secretariat for Summits of the Americas and the efforts of young people, and for trusting in the YBT and the OAS. You are already showing your strong leadership, supporting the efforts that you're making. I reiterate our commitment to continue to create opportunities from the Summit Secretariat, opportunities for participation for young people, and to continue to work with the YBT and its partners, empowering young people in our hemisphere and our region. Thank you very much. Thank you, Valeri. Thank you very much, Ms. Conte. It is always a pleasure to work with you. So we will be working toward the next forum of young people in the upcoming summit. There will be a forum, Mr. Secretary General. It's going to be inclusive, broad, and we know that we will have your support. There will also be a space for presenting projects for funding. Just await some further information about that. And lastly, we would like to ask you in all of our dialogues with the Secretary, we would like to take a group photo. Of course, unfortunately, the virtual situation has changed the dynamic. It's going to be a screenshot, but from the bottom of my heart, I would like to thank you on behalf of YBT and all the thousands of young people who participate in this process for your unending support. Thank you. And with this photograph, our session will end. So thank you and congratulations.